G'day YouTube, Warbles on a lot here. Gonna make a video I've been thinking about for quite a while. It's on the subject of personal bullshit content as an abstract concept. Everybody has a certain bullshit content. Last person I heard of who was assumed to have 0% bullshit content. Some people say his name was Joshua Ben David. Other people say his name was Jesus the Christ. Story goes that he had 0% bullshit content, so he wandered into the Temple of Solomon and he told the moneylenders that Deuteronomy forbids usury, which is the paying or charging of interest on loans. And he turned their tables over and threw the moneylenders out of the temple, and that was considered bad for business by the Chamber of Commerce. So they nailed him up to a tree, or at least to a couple of beams hewn from a tree with an adze. So if you can get your bullshit content down to 0%, that's what you can expect, right? You will be martyred historically. And it's really, really, really hard to get your bullshit content down to 0% and get yourself martyred. But yeah, that was a fellow who managed it. Me personally, I don't think my bullshit content is anywhere near that low. And it's an asymptotic approach that you make to the 0% bullshit content. I mean, it's pretty easy to go from 80% bullshit to 40% bullshit. It's not even that difficult to go from 40% to 20%. To get from 20% down to 10% or less than 10%, oh, dearie, dearie, dearie me, that takes a bit of work. Personally, I can only think of two really particularly accurate methods of calculating my own bullshit content. One of them is to measure my performance at being taught something that I never had any ambition to know about. When I was a little kid, I never ever wanted to be a nurse. It never crossed my mind that I would ever become a nurse. But I did once upon a time spend 3 years attending lectures and working on the wards of Repatriation General Hospital, Concord. And at the end of that, they gave me 2 3-hour examinations with 300 questions in each examination. And then they wrote me a letter. They addressed it to me. They put their own address up the top. What they said was, your standardised mark was 622, which corresponds to a percentile rank of 90.7. Awarded the grade of distinction in the final examination, 18th October 1983. On the flip side, they said 0 to 399 is a fail, 400 to 549 is a pass, 550 to 599 is a credit, 600 to 649 is a distinction, 650 plus is a high distinction. One correct answer in the examination has a value of approximately 8 standard marks. So if I got 4 more questions right, I would have got over 650 and I would have got a high distinction. And in due course, AL case registrar sent me my certificate of registration when I'd finished making up a certain amount of time at the end of the 3 years. And, well, a bullshit content of 9.3% when somebody else is teaching you something that you never had any great ambition to learn, I suppose that's not too bad. What about if you're teaching yourself to do something by yourself, autodidactically, just reading books and getting into it? What sort of a thing can we use to measure one's performance as an autodidact? What is the bullshit content of an autodidact in their own field of chosen expertise? Well, here's a way that occurred to me. In 1992, I found myself in need of a propeller for my aeroplane. So I designed and I laminated and I carved a 40-inch by 26-inch aeroplane propeller. 40 inches being the diameter from tip to tip, 26 inches being the twistiness, or how far it should advance theoretically in one revolution of 360 degrees. Now that propeller was for a particular engine, a JPX 22 horsepower, 2-cylinder horizontally opposed PUL 425, direct drive at 4,000 RPM. And I predicted that that propeller which does such sterling duty as a lamp stand, should produce 142 pounds of static thrust. And so, when I put it on my ultralight motor glider, before I did the flight testing, I measured the thrust of the propeller at full throttle with a Salter spring scale tied to the tail. And what I got was 138 pounds of static thrust, and that was enough for me to go flying with. 138 out of 142 as an autodidactic propeller carver. So if we check out the trusty rusty 1970s vintage calculator, or perhaps alligator, because it alligates and alleges things to be certain numbers, and we go 138 pounds of static thrust actually produced, divided by 142 pounds predicted, and we get 97.18309% accurate. If we then try 1 minus 0.971830 equals 2.81691% bullshit. And now we add the 2.81% bullshit onto the 9.3% bullshit, which was what I got. Try that again. Damn, I hate decimal point transposition hassles. 2.81691% bullshit plus 9.3% bullshit. That gives us, on the two examples, the two experiments, 12.11691% divided by 2 equals 6.058455% personal bullshit content measured across autodidactic propeller carving and regurgitating general nursing. But of course another factor is that I carved that propeller January, February 1992. So it's nearly 25 years ago. Maybe, perhaps, possibly, I've improved my game a little bit in the intervening 25 years. Maybe I'm getting down around an average bullshit content of 5% these days. It's what I like to flatter myself with thinking. 5%. Average bullshit content. Does that mean that everything I say is 95% correct? No. No, some things I say are 100% correct, and if I was absolutely 100% correct all day, every day for a month, then I'd probably go half a day where I talk a lot of crap. My bullshit content might be 50% for half a day. And that'll be because I've had a bad day the previous day and I've drunk too much booze and I've woke up with a hangover and I'm in a bad mood and somebody just happens to say something that gets up my nose and I can't be bothered moderating the response, and I give them the toned down sharpish edge of my tongue. I very rarely let loose and just see how much pain and misery I can inflict on other people by verbal means. But once upon a time I used to be pretty good at it. Pretty well, because I went to boarding school and I didn't know how to fight, but I could talk up a storm, so I developed the habit of talking as if I could fight pretty good, and most of the time that worked pretty well. Most of the time. But every now and then somebody who put their faith and trust in being able to swing their fists rather than sling the slang would thump the shit out of me. And yeah, I learned not to deliberately annoy people just for the fun of it. But sometimes some people labour under a misapprehension that they're being friendly when they're actually irritating the shit out of me. And I have been known to deliberately say things with the avowed intention of giving them the shits with me. Occasionally, it's given them the shits with me to such a point that I've become an obsession in their lives. And there's not much I can do about that. But when such a person decides that because I have failed to live up to their expectations of who they want me to be, then therefore I'm a complete, total bullshit artist, and they accuse me of having come out to live in the forest and be nice to the wildlife, purely for the purposes of attracting people to my channel so that I can then proselytise and propagandise, preach my political position at them, yeah, they're having themselves on. I'm just a perfectly normal, ordinary, mad scientist, tree-hugging, greenie, hillbilly hermit, fool on the hill. Sometimes everything I say for half a day is wrong. Sometimes everything I say for a month at a stretch is right. My bullshit content hovers and floats around 5%. And if it was much more than 5%, then the wildlife wouldn't be a part of my existence. They wouldn't hang around where I live. They wouldn't come up and eat out of my hand. Because wild, unfenced kangaroos have 0% bullshit tolerance from humans. And I started including the wildlife on my YouTube channel, specifically and particularly as a character reference for myself, so that people who were wondering whether they could believe anything that I had to say, in light of the fact that I literally really do live in a tiny little hut in a clearing in the forest, and by training I'm a nurse, but by inclination I'm an aeroplane propeller carver, an ultralight motor glider designer, constructor and test pilot with a history of designing and laminating and carving and testing and smashing to destruction a whole series of quixotic homegrown handmade windmills in wood and aluminium. So therefore you should probably trust my opinion when it comes to streamlined solar panels for automobile use on whatever it is you drive. Because if your battery's full, you don't need to waste any fuel by turning the alternator with a fossil fueled engine driving a step-up ratio drive belt to recharge the flatness of your battery, which has been sitting and sulfating since last time the engine was run, if the car should be lacking a solar panel and thereby dependent on its belt-driven alternator in order to recharge the flattery. So why should you take any advice from me? Well, ask a kangaroo. They're pretty certain that I can be trusted. If she thought I was a bullshit artist, she wouldn't let me approach this close, she wouldn't approach me this close, she wouldn't be eating my bread, and her Joey over there wouldn't be alive. Because she would have died from septicemia from the infected cut feet. So yeah, according to the kangaroos, I have an uncommonly low bullshit content compared to your average human, who kangaroos generally treat as if they are randomly murderous, dangerous predators on the land. My personal bullshit content's pretty low. Warbles on a lot to YouTube. Ciao.